Hi artists! Today we're going to do a project called Rubber Cement Batik Painting. So to know what to do, first you need to know what a batik is. Example of a batik fabric. The white spots are where the artist put the wax to leave that spot the color of the fabric. Then they dyed it all these different colors and then took the wax off to leave the color of the fabric behind. This one was a gold fabric. So the gold is where the wax was, and then they dyed red on top. Then this one, the white is where the wax was, and then they added the green on top. Sometimes artists use more than one color. So with this one, the blue would have been done first. The white is where the wax was, and then they dyed it blue. And then they put the wax where the blue is and dyed it red. So you get both those colors on there. So for our process, instead of using hot wax, we're going to use rubber cement. And instead of using fabric, you could use a thicker paper or a canvas. In my example, I use a canvas panel. You could also use stretched canvas. Here are two examples that I've created. You might recognize the owl because it's behind me also. You can see the white spots are where I put the rubber cement, and then the rest is painted. So how do we do this? Here are the steps, but don't worry, I'm going to show you a video on how to do it too. First, you want to practice your drawing so that you have the steps down and you make less mistakes. Don't worry if you do make a mistake with the rubber cement, because when it dries, you can rub those mistakes off and you won't be able to tell that you had any mistakes. It's just a little less frustrating if you have less mistakes. So after you've practiced drawing it, you're going to draw on the paper or canvas with your rubber cement. But you're not going to actually touch the brush of the rubber cement to the paper. You're going to let it drip onto there. Then you're going to let it dry. Paint the whole painting. Let it dry. Very important that all the paint is dry. If you accidentally have a spot that's not dry and you're rubbing the rubber cement off, you might smear your paint, and that can be really frustrating when you spent all that time working on it. After you rub the rubber cement off, you can either be done, or if you're using a stretched canvas or a paper, you can actually use embroidery floss and a needle, and you can sew into the picture. That makes another level, and it's kind of fun. So what does this process look like in action? Here is an example that I created for you. So this fish is the picture that I'm going to create with the batik process. I practiced drawing it on a regular piece of paper first, so I knew what I was going to draw. There's my rubber cement. Start by opening up the bottle. Remember I mentioned that the brush never touches the canvas. So I'm getting a lot of rubber cement on the brush and just letting it drip off so that I have a nice thick line. If you paint it on, it's too thin, and after you paint over it with the actual paint, it's really hard to get the rubber cement off if it's thin. So we want a thicker line. So here I drew the eye. I know it's really hard to see. Then I'm going to do the body of the fish, and then I'm going to speed the video up. So I'm going slow the whole time. As a matter of fact, if you notice that your line starts to get really thin, slow down, because that will give the rubber cement enough time to have more drip off to make a thicker line for you. I'm doing a little bit of the continuous line drawing technique where I go over the same line more than once. I really like how that looks personally. So here we go, speeding it up. I'm not really going this fast. If I really went this fast, it would be a jumbled mess of rubber cement. Now remember, you don't have to make a fish. That's just what I chose to make for mine. I've made the owl and the peacock that you saw. I made a different fish. I made a fox. You can make anything that you like to draw with this process. Helps if it's a little bit more cartoonish and not as realistic, but you can add details with the painting process also. Here we go. I'm done with the rubber cement. It's completely dry. So now I'm getting my painting supplies ready. As you choose your colors, remember all the things that you've learned in art class. You know about color groups like primary, secondary, warm, cool. You might have learned about analogous colors. Remember, those are next to each other on the color wheel. You might have learned about complementary, which are straight across from each other on the color wheel, like orange and blue. Those are things that are going to help you make your artwork look really interesting. Also, notice as I start my fish, I started off with a reddish color, and then I moved to a darker orange, and then a lighter orange, and I'm even going to move into yellow. Using that value in there is going to make my fish look more interesting than if I just painted it all orange. I really enjoy blending colors too, so that helps. You see, I'm kind of using a dabbing technique to kind of imitate the scales a little bit. I thought that looked really nice for the fish. I do it a little different with the background. Use more lines in the background. But it's totally up to you how you want your style to look. So using a lighter orange and then adding some of the darker yellow and then the really light yellow on the tips of the fin just to give it a little variety. You can see a little better with the top fin here. There's the light orange, darker yellow, lighter yellow. Now as I move on to the tail, I had a little bit of technical difficulties. My iPad died. So it's going to jump from the tail to finished, but you'll be able to see what it looks like when I finish it. I chose to use blue for the background because blue and orange are complementary colors and they make each other pop and really look interesting in a picture. So there's my finished painting. You can see I painted right over the rubber cement in lots of places. Now this is a couple hours later. My paint is all dry. I double checked and triple checked to make sure it was all dry. Just using my finger and rubbing where the rubber cement is, and it just peels right off. This is actually my favorite part of the process. All those little places where I painted right over it suddenly are a bright white with the batik process. Like, look at these scales popping out. It's a really fun step. It does make your arm a little sore though, so feel free to take some breaks. Makes a funny noise too. There's smiles popping out all of a sudden. Check out what happens with the eye. It was looking kind of sloppy, and then here it is. All the rubber cement is off, and that's what my final picture looks like. I mentioned earlier that if you want to, you can sew into these when you're finished. Both of these examples are created on stretched canvas, and these lines that are on the scales, I actually sewed with embroidery floss. These lines on the feathers of the owl and in these stripes and up here are also sewing with embroidery floss. When I do this, I like to poke the holes first, and then it's easier to sew and not accidentally make the holes in the wrong spot. Again, this is totally optional. I had some people on our art supply survey say that they would like to be able to use sewing. So I thought that would be a fun way to include that in the paintings. And then if you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can leave that off and it still looks like a beautiful painting. Don't forget to publish your masterpieces to Artsonia. We have a gallery already created called Rubber Cement Batik Paintings, and I absolutely cannot wait to see what you create.